Welcome to this session called Transforming Together, Managing and Commissioning Digital Projects. My name is Catherine Stevenson. I am the Director of Data Integration Infrastructure at Statistics Canada. I was just looking over the panelists because we didn't actually talk about this before. So I'm a bit of a data nerd from StatCan. And we're here to have an integrated, open, facilitated, informal chat with all of you out there. So just to give you a heads up, I'll introduce these three. They'll each walk through some opening remarks. And I invite you to think of your questions. Please don't be shy to go up to one of the microphones so we can have as interactive a discussion as possible. I will launch right away to introduce the panelists. On my far right, your left, Sylvain Bélanger, Executive Director and Chief Information Officer, Information Management and Technology Directorate, Treasury Board of Canada Secretariat. Next is Marc Brouillard, Chief Digital Officer at the Department of Fisheries and Oceans, Canada. And right here we have Anthony Sheehan, Chief Digital Officer, Courts Administration Service Canada, here in Canada. So I will turn it over to you, Sylvain, for some opening thoughts.
Perfect, thank you. Really, today we're talking about transformation within government. The main message I always give is digital transformation is not about the technology, but it's about the people and making sure that the people are taken care of as much as the technology when you're implementing those processes. And for that, I look at it in three ways. So it's about unlearning certain approaches, adapting and innovating together, because you really have to bring the groups together and move forward. And I'll touch briefly on those three. So the unlearning habits is really number one. It's about knowing we talk about the learning and new approaches and being able to adapt. Well, it's about unlearning old habits and being able to make sure that you're adapting to the new circumstances, the new situations in which you're facing the work you're doing. The second one is about agility, embracing the change required for shedding the outdated practices that you have. And the third is the alignment with the technology in terms of the mindset. So for that, you have to let go of the old mindsets that you had around the technology and the solutions and think about where you're going to be heading as a person, but also with your teams and with your organization. The second one is about change management practices. I'm very strong on that approach in my previous organization, and now I'm starting to see where the change management approach would be key for us, because you have to prepare people for the change. You have to reinforce that change, and you have to really maintain that change over time. Change is not something that ends tomorrow morning when you have a new solution in place. It's continual change, and you need, as an organization, to have a practice of change management to make sure that the people can continually adopt and evolve with the circumstances, whether it's change around the technology, change around the environments. A good example was COVID, where we started working remotely, and that was a big change. Being with your family 24 hours a day, that was a big change. And then the technology that we brought in to help support us, that was a big change as well, and being able to do that. And this is not something that now that we've gone through the pandemic, we're starting to return to the workplace. Change is continuous, so we're adapting to the new approaches within the workplace. The solutions are improving, the way you work with people. And this is something that you have to reinforce. Change is continuous, and you have to create that mindset. And the last one that I'll touch on briefly is building capabilities for the workforce of the future. If we're talking about unlearning habits, then building new capabilities is very important. If we're talking about change management, then building capabilities for the workforce of the future, again, so all three link really well together. And it's being able to adapt to the business planning processes, the resource efficiencies, and training and development will support that workforce of the future. And all three of those do not work independently. They are interconnected, and you need to make sure that you really pay attention to that from whatever seat you have within your organization, you all have a role to play.
Great. Thank you, Sylvain. Over to you, Mark.
Thank you. Good afternoon. It's officially afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone. So I couldn't agree more with what Sylvain said about it's always about the people, and the people are going to be the key enablers to making those changes. And the changes we're trying to make, the what, is really about what the digital ambition talks about. We want to modernize service. We want to reduce technical debt. We want to capitalize on data as an asset, all of those things. But I'll touch a little bit on what I call the how. This is the digital way. And if you've seen my talk at DPI, I talk about this for an hour, and I won't talk about it for an hour here, but just to give you a little bit of the changes that we're trying to make in terms of transforming the way we deliver digital and transforming the way we better meet the needs of the organization. Because at the end of the day, that's why we exist, is to support the organizations we work for in delivering their mandates. So the reason I put this slide up is because oftentimes in digital, we preach about being iterative, we preach about being agile, starting small, MVPs and all those types of things. But there's a catch in there. And one of the catches is doing only one of these pieces will provide benefits, but what I've found is this is a continuum. And when we hit a snag in this continuum that forces us to go back to waterfall, or that forces us to go back and answer the, well, how much and how big is the whole thing, we get stuck. And really understanding that the continuum of digital has to start from our original investment decisions, discussing why are we doing this, what are the outcomes, what is it worth, and then managing and governing effective milestones. So focusing on what needs to be done next, having that vision of the roadmap of where you're going, but making sure you're really focusing on what are the next pieces you're trying to deliver. That leads into product management, which is really just the same, but at the more tactical level, focusing on getting the teams enabled, getting them to be self-sufficient enough and enabled enough to be able to deliver on what we're asking them to deliver. Making sure we're having a user-centric approach, being agile in our development, and then having the technology to back that up. So the DevSecOps, the cloud, all the automation, all of those things. When we put all of those things together, it's really amazing how quickly we can deliver change and how agile we can be to be responsive to the needs of the organization. Someone said it this morning that you really need to build a partnership with the business. And that's really what it comes down to, is taking the stakeholders from the digital organization, the business organizations, and the folks who are actually going to be using or impacted by those changes, and make sure you have their inputs into everything that you're trying to do. So this is our guiding roadmap. And what we're learning is you can't boil the ocean, you can't do it all at once. But at the same time, you have to sort of start chipping away at all of these to make sure that you're not hitting places where you're going to roadblock or delay your capabilities because you're not entirely digital end to end. Just want to share that. Thank you.
That's great. I always love the visuals, so it helps really contextualize what you're talking about and all those pieces. Anthony.
Yes, thanks for the opportunity to be here. I will take just a little bit of time to explain, because even Catherine was like, where do you work? Courts Administration Service. What is that exactly? So I just want to position things a little bit. So I don't know if you've heard, but the former Premier of Newfoundland is suing the Government of Canada over the vaccine mandate, stating that it intruded into his privacy. That case will come before the federal courts. So Courts Administration Service, we support 4 federal courts. Okay, so that's one example of the cases we hear. The merger of Rogers against Shaw, the Commissioner of Competition wanted to block the merger. That ended up in front of the Federal Court of Appeal. Every time Indigenous peoples make a claim for land against the Government of Canada, that ends up in front of the federal courts. When there's an appeal of the behavior and conduct from one of the members of our Canadian forces, that can end up in front of the Court Martial Appeal Court, which is another of our courts. If you have a claim, either individually or from a business standpoint, against the government of Canada, you can end up in front of the tax court of Canada. Anytime CSIS wants to put someone on the no-fly list or get a warrant for their duties, they have to come in front of the federal courts. A refugee that wants to bring some of their relatives in Canada, and they're wondering if they will be able to talk to them in a day, the next week, the next month, because their life is at threat. They can make a claim against the Immigration and Refugee Board against their decision, and that ends up in front of the federal court. So you can understand that in a world of increased polarization, the independence of the courts and ensuring that we can have accessible and high-performing judicial services is an underpinning of our democracy, okay? One of the issues is that, like many other departments, the courts rely on old systems. And that is an issue, and an issue that we are actively working to fix. So, similar to Mark, I couldn't agree more with Sylvain's statements, and I agree with everything you said, Mark. And what I'm trying to do here is to give you a little bit of an example of the importance of getting transformation right, and going through a little bit of that case study at Courts Administration Service. So because of the importance of our mandate, because of the state of our legacy systems, in 2019, we received $54 million to renew our legacy system. Now, as you can imagine, in 2020, we had to pivot most of our activities to providing judicial services remotely. And that created a situation where digital, instead of being the means to improving services, was in fact being the end goal that was being sought. So we made things digital, but we didn't necessarily make them better. We didn't have the really strong service and digital capabilities that we needed to respond to the pandemic, and let alone have a project to renew our digital legacy systems and really go from a paper organization to a digital and modern organization. And in the summer of 2022, so 3 years after we started the project to renew our legacy systems, and exactly at the time that I started as Chief Digital Officer at Courts Administration Service, on the advice of Treasury Board Secretariat, we ended up pausing the project. So 3 years later and about $6 million later, we didn't have that much to show for. And then we took a step back and said, well, what happened here? So I hit the ground learning, not hit the ground running, hit the ground learning, and talked to everybody. And I asked some of my managers, I said, hey, how do you think you're doing a good job? And they said, well, this is a bit weird. My new boss asking me if I'm doing a good job. And they said, well, of course. And I said, well, how do you know? Well, I work really hard. I'm like, okay, that's an excellent start. But what data do you use to know if you're doing a good job? And they're, a little bit deer in headlights. Amazing people. By the way, we have very little attrition rate. Everybody stayed along for our journey. But we needed to change a little bit how we were doing things. And then everybody was saying, hey, I need more people. But then I look at the financial information and we're lapsing money. So no, that doesn't quite work. There were a number of things that weren't in place for us to be successful to respond to the pandemic, and let alone do an end-to-end digital business transformation. So what we did is that we took a step back and said, okay, we need to fix this. And this is the key point. You heard Mark talk about not only do the MVP thing, not only manage it when it's its prod, but also make sure that you target the right investments and you go end to end. You heard Sylvain talk about the importance of people. When we do digital business transformation, it is absolutely not about the tech. It is about people, process, technology. It's about the culture. It's about how we work. So what we did is that we said, okay, we need to rethink all of that. We need to rethink our governance, our engagement, our demand management frameworks. We need to get contracts in place where we can access talent as and when required, professional services. We need everything. We need all of that. All of that service and digital foundation is what keeps the lights on. If you have a cracked foundation, running your business, keeping the lights on, will consume way more money than it needs to. If that happens, then you don't have enough money to do projects. And those projects, the realization of those projects also rely on the same broken foundation. So what happens? You don't deliver on the intended benefits. And then what happens? Well, you accumulate technical debt. And then you have to go to the center and say, hey, sorry, I need a TV sub, or I need more money to replace my legacy systems. So the key problem here is not that you failed at your transformation, is that you have to transform in the first place. So let me be clear on that. If you need to transform, it's because you're already behind. A good, high-performing organization with the right enablers, and this is not because of lack of intent that public services across the government of Canada need to transform. There's a number of other issues that we're going to talk about. But the main problem is not our inability to transform successfully. I think it's the fact that we have so many transformations in front of us because we are not able to keep up. And that is what we need to fix. It is how are we embedding the ability as an institution, as an organization, to keep up with the expectations and needs of citizens and the market in which we operate. So I'll leave that as a few intro remarks. Thanks.
I'm like, I don't know about you in the audience. I'm like, whoa, that was a whole thing from I now understand the federal court to perhaps a story that many of us can relate to, which is this idea of there's no shortage of projects we can see and no shortage of things we believe could be better digitized, could have better flow to them. My question, I guess, back to you three, while I wait for someone in the audience, anyone in the audience, to feel free to come up to one of the microphones, is the reality on the ground. I have to deliver. I have to deliver today, and I have to carve out time to explore what that project looks like to transform some piece of the business, so we avoid what you said, Mark, of the boiling the ocean. Can you guys share an experience you have of a successful team that was able to do that? I keep delivering. I got stuff coming out as expected, and I've been able to carve out that time.
That's a deep question.
So I can give one example of our Canadian Fishery Information System. And by the way, boiling the ocean is my favorite DFO pun. Some historical context, but we are one of the most distributed departments in the Canadian government. We have, I think, 400 offices across Canada, obviously. Coast Guard, fisheries, licensing, all sorts of different activities. So it was kind of normal that the organization grew up with lots of different systems that do lots of different things all over the place. And an example of that boiling the ocean was trying to consolidate a bunch of different licensing systems, a bunch of different capabilities into one new system. It made a lot of sense. We want a national enterprise system. There's nothing wrong with that. But trying to figure out all the permutations of all of the different requirements across the entire organization and doing that as one release was just very, very prone to failure, was very, very prone to significant challenges that always added a different layer of complexity. And so you were never getting out of that. You were never getting ahead of it. So one of the things we did is we transformed that team into a product management approach. We partnered with the business. And when we say we partnered with the business, the way DFO is organized, there is a national team that manages those policies, but then there are regional teams as well that manage the actual activities that sort of happen on the ground. We said we're not going to do that national approach anymore. We're going to take one system in one region and focus on that. And we will modernize that. And we recognize that by modernizing one at a time, we may not be getting all the business rules, we may not be getting all the complexities, but we will get there and we will add to it. And when we do a second and a third and a fourth, we will address those issues. As long as the mindset that you're going into the project with is you need to build the thing that is going to be changed often. And it's built into the process and it's built into the mindset of we're just going to keep adapting as the business changes. Well, now all of a sudden you have agility, you have the capability of reacting. And in fact, so much so that when we demonstrate the system and we talk about the system, our business partners are there with us and they're showing it, and you can tell they're really proud of it, and that they understand how this is making their business better and helps them individually as well. So that's the type of progress that really we're able to build on. So I really, really encourage that approach to not boiling the ocean. Boiling the ocean bad.
I see a couple of people ready to ask questions, but I'll come to you too quickly if you
Yeah, and
want.
it goes to not trying to do everything at once when you're going into those types of initiatives. I'll give an example. When I was at Library and Archives Canada as the CIO, we implemented a digital asset management system, which will, in the long run, transfer the archival information from departments to Library and Archives Canada. It also manages all the publications that come in from publishers across the country. And with as we were implementing the system, we started with a library component because it's so well structured that we could gain the experience. But we also knew that from a change management perspective and people perspective, this is an area where we would have to put in place different approaches to the change. And so we used a human-centered approach, and we brought in experts that worked with the teams directly to develop the journey of the work they do, the publications, the type of publications, so that they could see the journey of the objects across the organization at the current state and then future state, so that they could see, as they were putting in place this new solution, what the changes would be for them. And rather than then changing it and letting them use it, we had them learn how to use the technology and do the change themselves, so that they would be part from the foundation up, as Anthony talked about the foundation, really building it with them so that they own it from the beginning. So that's one of the examples that I can give.
I love that example. The idea of, the walking people along the journey, or that idea of co-creation, so that you can, you don't arrive with the product and then figure out how to do the change management. It's embedded in the whole journey. Did you want to share something?
Yeah, sure. A few quick comments. I mean, I'll just reuse the same example. So when we got the money initially, 2019, the plan was basically to pick, a COTS product, pick a systems integrator, and plug and play, and we would solve world hunger. And you obviously know how that finished. So we went from basically trying to shove a watermelon down people's throat, and instead saying, hey, here's a bowl of grape, you can pick some when you're hungry. If you go from a push model to a pull model, which is, maybe not in those words, but a little bit what Mark described, whereas instead of changing the system end to end, say, look, let's find a win, let's make it work. And then people are going to talk about it. You're going to create momentum. And then, someone else will come along and someone else will come along. So instead of having to convince everybody up front about the target state and how amazing it is, pick something small enough where you can actually manage the complexity of life, because, you all know life is unpredictable. And then you get a win. And then you build momentum, and then people will come to you as opposed to the other way around.
Love it. Okay, out to the microphone. Yes.
Good afternoon. So some of the panelists have talked about some of the, amount of transformation that we have to do and the obstacles that kind of derail us. What are one or two things that the central agencies, TBS, PSPC, SSC, need to be doing better to support the whole of government and all the transformation initiatives that have to happen?
Can I give it a shot?
Sure, go for it.
I mean, there's tons. There's tons of things, but I think that, and there's been some talk about the following, which is basically you instead of funding projects, you can either fund products, which is one way to put it, but you can also fund teams. I think if Treasury Board, and by extension Treasury Board Secretariat, valued a little bit more outcomes-based approaches, then we would get better results. And if you look at VC firms, and you listen to successful pitches. So the pitch is absolutely critical, but they also look at the team and what they've done before. Our model is based on the premise that I'm being a little bit sensationalistic, but if you throw money at the problem, it'll solve it. We keep forming and dismantling teams all the time. It takes a lot of time to form a team, let alone hire and retain. It takes a lot of time to storm and norm and eventually perform. High-performing teams is what generates amazing services, amazing results. So the more we can organize the system to create these high-performing teams and move them to problems, as opposed to throwing money at projects where you have to create and then dismantle teams and do this storm norm perform all over again, then I think that we would be in a much better position.
I would also say, as a government, we're not really good at working together. We're really individual teams doing their own thing. We have to find an approach, and in emergencies, we're great. COVID showed us how we react quickly as a government of Canada, and we get the things done. But in the normal day-to-day, we go back to old processes and old approaches. And we lack that collaboration across the system between different departments, where a lot of us are working on the same things, but in our own silos. And we need to break those, and we need to find an approach where we will collaborate more closely together. And that's something that we haven't, as I'm in a central agency, but I'm the departmental CIO, but I can see where I was before and even now that's probably one of the biggest areas we need to get better at.
What they said.
Okay, next question, please.
Thank you. So as CIOs and CDOs, I see a large component of your job is kind of the executive community management, working with other executives and bringing them along as stakeholders or getting them to buy into these transformation initiatives and be partners in this. So when you look at the executive cadre and there's a spectrum of people who don't understand why this is so difficult and why we can't do certain things, and they're way ahead of where the government is even at. And then the other kind of side of the spectrum where they think, we don't need any of this stuff. Some people are almost proud of not being on board with technology in this big spectrum. How do you message and communicate these initiatives so that you can bring people along and get them to buy in despite those two people potentially being in the same room or the same committee?
I think you have to have a shared vision of the outcomes. If people don't know what the reason we're trying to change, why we're trying to do something, and I'm not talking about the executive level, that's going to go through the whole organization and have that buy-in. If you don't have that, it's going to be very, very difficult to get people on board. Now, sometimes you go through that process at the end of the process, at the end of the change, and you want to engage and you want to build training and you want to communicate with the folks that are impacted. But it really helps to get them ahead of the time, at least awareness of what's coming and why it's good, what this is going to do to benefit the organization. Most people, once they see why we're doing something and want to see those changes, become very, very supportive. No one likes having change shoved at them when they don't understand why we're trying to do it. So I would say that early engagement is probably critical, and then fostering it and listening and making sure that it's a partnership.
And so I'll preface it by Graham works for me, but I didn't set up the question. When I was at Library and Archives Canada, I put together a team to develop its vision to 2030. And we took a change management approach and we practiced it throughout the full 24 months. And what Graham's describing is the two ends of the spectrum. Those who will buy in right away, they're actually far ahead of you in terms of the change management. Then the other piece is the ones that you will have to find a way to bring them along. The middle piece, they'll buy in once they get comfortable with the situation. We spent months talking about change, not even talking about the vision for the organization, to get people to understand that the work we're going to be doing with them is going to impact them one way or the other. It might change the work they do or just the feeling of where the organization is going. But having those conversations just to prepare people and getting them to understand how it affects them, but also how it could help them move forward is really a key piece.
It's a great question. Thanks. I think maybe three things. Number one is the accountability needs to be clear in terms of making the service owners accountable for the performance of their services. And that includes pulling every lever in the toolbox, whether it's tech, whether it's throwing more people at the problem, or enabling people to solve the problems in a better fashion, changing the policies, the rules. All of that is basically under the accountability, depending on the model, of the service owner. So if you have that accountability to improve your service, and technology is a means by which you will achieve that, then that should be a pretty easy sell. The second piece is around really craftsmanship, respect of craftsmanship. I started my career in the video game industry, and the game designers were always the one under the most pressure, because everybody thought that they could be a good game designer. Like, no one could possibly figure out how to program the enemy so that they would attack at the right level of difficulty, or do other crafts that were not easy to kind of understand and pick up. The game design crafts has a lot of science underneath it, but it's not visible. People don't necessarily know, and like all of social media, there are arguably designers underneath that are tweaking the algorithm to make them addictive, unfortunately, for the mental health of our youth and all of us, arguably. But the game design has a lot of that science underneath that is not visible. So when we have executives nowadays, or all of us, that can basically pull up a phone, order something on Amazon, order something through Apple and so forth, they're like, how hard can it be? Because I can do this in my personal life all the time. And they don't understand the difficulty and the craftsmanship that is involved. So I think that one of the key things is to build that trust through many different ways of building trust. There's whole tons of research on that. And once you've established that trust, then you say, look, if I told one member of the court with the utmost respect, I said, I'll never tell you how to render a judgment. Don't tell me which technology is the best, right? Come to see me with your business problems, and I will bring my craftsmanship to the table and make the best recommendation for you to be able to be successful. So a little bit of that, push and play.
Thanks.
I love that. Not an idea of what you actually do around change management and around saying out loud things that often are in people's heads, assumptions that people make about how hard people work. If something isn't delivered as quickly as they think it should, people often default to, well, the team's not that good, or they're not working hard enough. Or so having these conversations out in the open to really share and get on a common understanding of what's involved. Always come back with that with the private sector of, is it accessible? Is it bilingual? How are they securing your data? Who are they selling it to? All kinds of issues around stewardship that people give the private sector a free pass on, but absolutely wouldn't make sense in our bureaucratic context. So very interesting. I will take the question way at the back, please. Yes, you.
Hi. I've been working on a project for the last 4 years on trying to get digital transformation, and I found a few barriers. I wanted to get some of your insights into the barriers that I might have seen. The first was at my level, at the bottom, people saying, I've seen other people try to do change. Why do I even think that you're going to be successful this time? At the same time, we had seniors management that have so much on their plates, and it took a lot of convincing to get them to realize that digital transformation was needed. But then we got to the point of needing money. And the budget submission made us go to, how many people do we need in year 5? And what's the cost of that technology? And yet we're told we're supposed to be agile. How do we know, and why are we being forced into the system? We're supposed to be completely waterfall and know that no technology will change in 5 years, and I need 3 CS2s doing this job. And then when we moved into some kind of execution, we had a performance management and the whole system around project management that was waterfall. We needed a business case completely written before we could move past and do any kind of execution. How do we change some of these underlying needs that are coming from TBS, for the budget, from project management, to actually align with the transformation we're being asked to do today? And are you seeing those same issues, and have you found a way of overcoming them?
Great question. I was going to say hands up if you face this in your day-to-day job, right? This is a quintessential government of Canada tension between what's appropriate stewardship of public funds, having accountability, and then the actual realities of working with technology. So, Mark, I feel like you're ready to hit this one out of the park.
Yeah, and so I experienced all of that, and probably from both sides of the fence. Certainly at Treasury Board and receiving those. If you have to go to Treasury Board, you're probably too big to, I don't want to say to succeed. You can succeed, but you're too big to succeed in an agile fashion. Our governance, our government, our oversight, our policies just don't allow it. And there's some pretty good reasons for that. Not saying there wouldn't be other ways of doing it, and I know that those discussions are taking place, and I haven't been at Treasury Board for a while, but there's those discussions are valid and they're alive, except that there's also very, very good reasons why we don't give out billions of dollars without asking, what are you going to deliver for that? Those are probably bad ideas. So what I can say is, if you can stay below the Treasury Board requirements, which limits the size of the transformations you can do, but it also allows you to build that nimbleness into what you're trying to do, and it gives you a little bit more control. But then you still have to convince your own internal governance to be digital. So we couldn't deal with in-year, 1 year at a time funding and expect to hire teams. Anthony, you talked about funding the team. That's absolutely critical. You have to build a product team that is going to have a team that is going to stay with that product over its life cycle and is going to understand it and is going to be able to work at all of the changes that are happening over time. That doesn't work if you only have funding till the end of the year. Legally, we cannot hire indeterminate employees without indeterminate funding, right? There's just some authority issues there. So understanding that, one of the things we did is we said, all right, we don't know necessarily what this year, next year, or the year after's priorities are going to be. Like you said, you can't answer the question, what are 3 CS2s going to do in 5 years from now? But what we do know is transformation is here for a while. I won't say permanently, maybe we'll finish, but what I suspect is by the time we're done with this round of transformations, we're ready for the next round. So let's assume that there's an ongoing need for digital transformation on an ongoing basis. The business needs change, the technology changes, the priorities of the government change, all of these things. We're in a constantly changing environment. So asking what it's going to take to do a project for 5 years, you're guaranteed that by the time you get to that 5th year, your priorities have changed. So we need to be more able to be adaptable to that. So what that means is establish some form of digital funding governance that's going to say, we have a pot of money, wherever that pot comes from, however that pot is defined, whether it's A-base, B-base, reserve, all the different mechanics of the government funding models, but define it as, this is the money we're going to use on an ongoing basis to transform. It's going to allow you to build teams. It's going to allow you to build products. And then through governance, through working with the stakeholders, understanding how those priorities change, and that's how you apply the resources on a year-by-year basis. So we determine what the funding priorities for next year are. I know what the envelope is. I know that I have resources that I can apply to those things, and I don't have to start over every year. And the reality is, we are not going to do complete 180s every year. Things may hit us, but generally speaking, there are going to be adjustments. This is a little bit more important this year. This is a little bit less important, and we can tweak those factors. But generally, all of the things we're working on are going to continue to be priorities on an ongoing basis. So that allows us to deal with that funding priority. And then we just focus on enabling the teams, getting the work, having regular governance to demonstrate. I always say, show the thing. Show me what you did in the last quarter. Show me what you're going to do in the next quarter. Keep going. And that's the way we measure the progress. it's uncomfortable and it requires bringing people along. It's very different, and it's very hard to say, we don't know what we're going to be doing in 3 years. We don't know if this is going to be the same priority in 3 years. But what I do know is I'm not going to be the one that's going to decide that, sorry. The business is going to tell me if their priorities are changing, and I'm going to be responsive to the needs of the business. That's sort of the focus and the mindset shift. So I hope that was helpful.
Yeah. We've got about 5 minutes left. Do either of you two want to add anything to that?
I'll take more questions as well.
Sounds great. Okay, you're next.
So I wanted to ask how you mentioned transitioning to COTS products. So I wanted to ask, what do you think we can do in transitioning all of our legacy systems, which were mostly built in-house, to COTS products, easier from a management perspective, project management perspective, product management perspective, given how complex our government department and agencies needs are that COTS products aren't necessarily developed to address, in the hopes of avoiding Phoenix debacles in the future?
So I worked on the next gen HR and pay. You may be familiar with the Phoenix pay system. So I was on the team that did the agile procurement with a bunch of other amazing people. And that was one of the number one conversations, is the government really ready to have a COTS product pay public servants? And we had good conversations with Okro and others. And that is the real question. It's a little bit like, you heard Stephen at the beginning talk about cloud. It's not cloud by default. It's cloud when it makes sense. It's the same for COTS. It's COTS when it makes sense. And when it does make sense is when the business is willing to adapt their business processes to leverage out-of-the-box configuration as much as possible, because that is where you get the real savings. If you take a platform like Dynamics or any other, ServiceNow, Salesforce, whatever, platform that you want to pick, and those are arguably more platform than pure SaaS, but there is a real license cost. And the license cost only, in my opinion, makes sense when you adapt your business processes to the SaaS product. If you don't do that, then I'd argue that you're probably better off not using a SaaS product. Quick thoughts.
Good gap. Yeah.
Thank you. Excuse me. Thank you. Okay, in the last 4 minutes, rapid fire here. No, I'm kidding. I think one thing I just wanted to say to the woman who asked at the back about how to navigate within a project management structure, I have to put a pitch in for the Government of Canada Public Service Data Challenge that launches again next month. If you are, and I think you referred to yourself as being at the bottom or being a junior employee, I think is how most of us would refer to you. And you want some really practical experience of how to make those pitches, those elevator pitches, those sales pitches, how to navigate business case, how to navigate uncertainty, and in the context of having these very firm rules. I think the Data Challenge is a place where you can connect with people in other departments in various roles at various levels, and you get the benefit of learning from other people's experience of how they navigate, and then you also get a very practical way of doing it within the context of having a panel like this to pitch to. That help you grow those skills, because I think there's not a handbook for how to do these things. A lot of it comes from learning from others and having the experience yourself. So I know there's a booth out there somewhere. So I just wanted to flag that for people as a way where you can grow those skills and get access to more opportunities outside of your day-to-day job. In our final 2 minutes, could each of you take 30, 45 seconds, and in terms of delivering, managing, participating in a digital project, what would be your best piece of advice for people out there? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think we talked about it a little bit. So kind of two key concepts. Number one, on the funding side, it's super important that either everyone in the team or at a minimum the executives in place and managers understand the key 3 ingredients to be able to go get money. So one, you need to understand machinery of government. If you don't know how the money flows, how to get the money, internal, B-base, reserve, whatnot, it's not going to work. There's people that need to really understand that and fight to be able to go get the money. Number 2, you need to have the stories. Treasury Board ministers have a whackload of requests coming their way. So how do they prioritize? They prioritize based on what's best for Canadians and what makes the most sense. How do you tell that story? You actually talk about the impact of the status quo, the impact of not getting the funding. A little bit what I tried to do at the beginning of saying, look, this is what the federal court's mandate is. This is why, the courts matter in Canada. You need that storytelling. If you can't tell a good story, you'll be in problem. Lastly, get the data. So if you know how the machinery of government works, you can tell the right story and then back it up with data. Then it's going to be a home run. Lastly, once you've got the funding, then you deliver. Exactly like Mark said, you basically try something, you deliver, and then you show how it went. So you say what you're going to do, you do it, and then you show people that you did what you said you would. And then you do that all over again. That's how you do it.
At the end of the day, it's always about the people. And you can't deliver anything without the teams. You can't pitch anything without the team. So invest in your teams, listen to your teams, find out what they need to get things done and support them, clear their roadblocks, and then get out of the way. That's my best advice.
And make sure that your teams are not all thinking the same way. Bring in the resistors, bring in the people that will challenge the way the work is being done, because that's where you'll have the biggest growth.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Sylvain, Mark, Anthony, and audience for your great questions. And we will now take a quick break, and you're all welcome to rush the stage and ask them your burning questions that you didn't have a chance to hit them with at the mic. And then I invite you to choose your next session. Thank you very much.
Thank you.